quite important. Nostradamus wrote 942 quatrains, and they're all index dated between 1 and 100. And before I wrote my complete Nostradamus, no one paid any attention to these index dates. They were just irrelevant. Okay, it's number 1, number 2, number 3. But why? Because the quatrains weren't in any particular order. There had to be a reason. And I simply decided to assume that the index dates were important and to work from that. So I took a 700-year blank, which is, let's say, Nostradamus died in 1566. So I took the 16th century, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, and just into the 22nd century. Nostradamus felt that 7 was a significant number, and I believe he used about a 700-year concept for his dates. I then looked in every year using the index date. Let's say the index date was 15. I would look at 1515, 1615, 1715 throughout history to see if any historical events would tie in with at least 3 points in each documentary. And if it did, that's what I would use. And if it didn't, I'd put it aside and keep it till later. And the ones that were left over, about 100, 110 of them, I decided had to refer to the future by process of elimination. So these are the ones that I've put into this book. Since the book came out, virtually every single quatrain has come nearly or completely true. And I can really stand there and hand on heart and say, look, go and look at the early editions. Nothing's changed. So we'll see about Hillary Clinton. I'm afraid the terrorist attacks, Nostradamus feels that they're going to continue. And I think so too. And I think he was being pretty prescient about that, about his technique. He had a secretary who used to take dictation from him, Leonème de Chavigny, and he would fill a basin, a copper basin, with water, and he would put in black ink so that the water was completely black. He would then imbibe or eat copious amounts of nutmeg, which are slightly hallucinatory. They have that capacity. And he would look into the water with a cloth over his head so that he was completely subsumed in what was happening. There would be hazel twigs over the water which he would hold. Hazel was something the Romans felt would conduct good thoughts and potentially had alchemical qualities. And he would then stare in the water, and he felt, I think, that he couldn't see clearly into the future, but it was as if the future was a black a wall hanging, and that there was a little hole, and that if he could just get close enough, he could see a tiny amount through the hole. And he would then call this out to his secretary, who would immediately write it down. And then he transposed that into quatrains of 4 lines each that would rhyme. I think he felt that was more amenable to people. They would pay more attention if they rhymed. And that's how he would do. He would have to be in the right mood, but he would set himself that, and he would. I think the nutmeg is interesting. I wouldn't want to eat those massive proportions of nutmeg. It would be not good. But
who's the secretary?
I think he was called Jean-Yves de Chavigny. And he was Jean-Yves de Chavigny, and he was a very honourable, very fine man who fulfilled his master's words after Nostradamus' death, which Nostradamus foretold the night before it happened, one has to say. I mean, it was a fair cop. He was, let's have a look, 1503 to 1566. He was 63, and he had very bad gout, heart condition, bad arthritis, but he did get it dead on the ball. He clearly said, I'm going to not live beyond tomorrow, and he did. He died that day, and there were witnesses to a number of books. I think the first book came out in 1555. I think it had something like 350 quatrains in it, and he thought it would absolutely be a dud. It would just go flat. And he was stunned when it became very, very popular indeed. And he then brought out other quatrains. At the time, he was also bringing out astrological charts and almanacs and whatever, but these quatrains are quite different, and they epitomize something very, very different, and they seem to be complete in themselves. And the idea of 1,000 is very specific. and he brought that out in 2 to 3 books. And we have access online, it's wonderful, to photo stats of all the earliest books, so you can look at the quatrains, compare the four earliest printings, and be absolutely sure that you get as close as you possibly can. It's incredibly fascinating and very, very interesting. And I grew up in France, so for me it was, and quite near where Nostradamus was born in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. And I loved all that. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was great fun. And so really the quatrains that I've chosen, the French, is as exact as it can possibly be. It's mainly about France. No. Many, funnily enough, are about England and countries around France. Some about the New World, some about India. Geographically, they're incredibly spaced. For instance, there's an extraordinary quatrain, index dated 49, and any historian will immediately know what I'm talking about, when it says, "The English Parliament will put their king to death." Well, at the time that Nostradamus wrote this in 1555, no parliament had ever put their king to death. It had never occurred. And Charles I was beheaded in 1649, nearly 100 years after Nostradamus wrote that incredible quatrain. And no one before me, it had never occurred to anyone that the index date of 49 might be relevant to that quatrain. I still stand with my mouth open and cannot understand why this occurred. I simply assume it was for the ease of commentators, because if you're not limited to 7 years, as I was, you can pull from anywhere in history and make the thing fit into any sort of shape you want. And I wasn't prepared to do that. So no, he wasn't geographically. Many are, but many aren't. A lot of the Arab world, a lot of Persia, Germany, all the states that would have been of interest to him. And of course he knew of the New World as well. And feel that some of his prophecies could be prevented or from happening. Yes, he did. I absolutely believe that. I don't think he felt anything was set into stone. And I think in a way he was using his prophecies as a pedagogical tool, in the sense of, if you look at history and you understand history, you are able to change it. It's quite possible to make things better. Funnily enough, the gentleman who owned Watkins before Eton asked me if Nostradamus had ever done any quatrains that actually presented good news or something that could actually be changed. And we did a book called Nostradamus the Good News, and I discovered that about 100 quatrains were indeed positive and upbeat. So yes, I think he definitely did feel that things could be changed, and we needed to listen. Rather like Confucius, he was writing to teach the leaders of the world what they must do to avoid horror, really. So yes, it's a good question about the Third World War. And this is coming according to, it will be caused by the person that Nostradamus considers to be the third Antichrist. He believes there are 3 Antichrists. The first is clearly Napoleon. The second was clearly Adolf Hitler, as he writes enormous numbers of quatrains about those. And the third is going to be born in an eastern country round about 2035, and he'll be round about 35 at the time of the Third World War, which will be predated by an asteroid striking the Earth in 2069. And then we have global war, and there are all index dated, so they were all meant to be, they're in different centuries, but all index dated 70. So they all clearly apply to the same thing. And there are a number of them. There are 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 quatrains very clearly about a major global war. And then after the war, there will be a phoenix period. There will be a period where things go better, and the bird comes through the fire and remains untouched. And then he slowly peters out towards the end of the 21st century. And as far as I can tell, he believes that the Earth will continue until round about 7073. Again, the sevens, this obsessive sevens. He has 2 quatrains at the end. 20 years after the moon's reign is over, another monarch will take over for 7,000 years. Again, this obsession, 7,000. When the sun finally takes its leave, my prophesying will be accomplished. and then he has one wonderful last quatrain. I will.
Anything about space age travel? Mars?
Not really. I don't get that. I've never really discovered anything that he certainly describes flying things,
Yeah.
but I've never actually anything to do with the space age. No, I haven't managed to winkle it out. But the last quatrain, again, this is quite nice. Like, if anyone knows T.S. Eliot, you know the four quartets. Time present and time past will be judged by the great comedian. The world will tire of him when it is too late, having forsaken its conventional clergy. And the final prophecy of the Armageddon, 7074, when the great number 7, again this 7, completes itself, games will begin at the tombside. Not far from the turn of the millennium, the dead will rise out of their graves. And as anyone knows who's seen a doom painting, you go to Romania or any of the great monasteries, and you see the doom painting. The dead climb out of their graves, holding hands, pair by pair, and they move up towards the right hand of God. Those, of course, who've lived decent lives. The others, I'm afraid, head downwards into the mouth of the monster. And so that's a very clear doom painting depiction, I think. Sorry. B, roundabout quite near Albania, but I can't remember where. Definitely from the eastern part of Europe. But again, you know, where he's born is almost irrelevant. It doesn't redound back onto the country of his birth. After all, Hitler was born in Austria, and you know, he ended up destroying Germany and everything else. But so, have you got it? 143. Let's have a look. Yes, there might be a precursor there. Birth of Presage 1. Yeah, here we go. Yes, there's a presage there. Well done. 3 possible sites of the third Antichrist birth are given. Milk and the blood of frogs flow in Dalmatia. Battle is joined. There's plague near Balen. Wailing will echo throughout enslaved Slovenia when the monster is born in and near Ravenna. Now this sounds like Ravenna in Italy, but there are a number of Ravennas actually in Europe. It's potentially Croatia. There's a Ravenna in Romania, Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, Serbia. There are a number of places that this could happen. But that's what he appears to be suggesting. Thanks for finding that, because it wasn't the actual one, it was before. It was a good thing. But so there we are. It's down. You know, whether anything comes of it, I don't know. But it seems reasonable to assume that there are 3 antichrists. In the Bible, there's no mention of 3 particular antichrists. There's mention of antichrists. So that's perfectly possible. I've actually written a book, again for Watkins, on the Antichrist, just the Antichrist quatrains, which cover all the, not the Napoleon quatrains, all the Hitler quatrains, and all the quatrains of the third Antichrist to come. So that is as far as we can get. Who knows? I won't be around, thank goodness, to find out about this. But he was by birth a Jew, but his family converted to Catholicism. Under good King René in Provence in the 15th century, Jews were allowed to follow their faith. But with the 2 kings that came afterwards, no, they really had to convert or be seen to convert, otherwise their lives were pretty miserable. And so his family converted, and funnily enough, he took it very seriously, while retaining that interest in the Kabbalah and the Jewish chain. He also was a very strict Catholic, and he was buried in an abbey. I mean, the Catholics would not have allowed him to be buried in an abbey if he did not proclaim himself as a Catholic at the time of his death. And the Queen certainly believed him to be that, so yes. And the premiere was due to happen last Monday, 3 days after the Paris terrorist attack. And in the book, I talk about terrorist attacks, and we had a lot of discussion about it in the film. And History Channel decided on the Saturday after the attack, the day after the attack, to pull the documentary as it was offensive or potentially offensive or upsetting to the people that had lost their lives, or the families of those who had lost their lives. And I'll tell you why. There are a couple of quatrains which are really quite stunningly prescient, and they were the ones I discussed at the time. and they're dated, I've dated them according to their index dates, between 2 and 3 years out. But I think when I read them to you, you'll realize how specific they are. The first one is, because of French carelessness and misunderstanding, the Mohammedans will find a way in. Blood will soak the Seine by land and sea. The Phocenician port will fill with sails and vessels. Well, that's very specific about an attack on the Seine, Paris, whatever. The